Excellent. Hi, folks. I'm Kate Malloy. I'm your virtual buddy for this session, beaming in from the west coast of Ireland and for once very sunny Galway. And it's my first time leading a virtually connecting session as a virtual buddy. I've done it plenty of times on site and I've been an on-site guest. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to Alt because it's just such a busy time of year for us. But I'm happy to have the conversation. So I might just pass over to our on-site folks from the Alt conference. And I know Jesse had a big morning with his keynote. If you'd just like to introduce yourselves and say maybe why you're there, and then we can introduce our virtual participants as well.
John, do you want to start?
Sure. My name is John Robertson. I'm used to work in the UK with a lot of folk here, but I've been in the States for 7 years. I currently work at Seattle Pacific University and I manage a small EdTech unit.
Thank you.
Here. I was co-presenting with Charlie Farley from Edinburgh about 23 things.
Great. I love it.
It is very good.
Okay.
Hi Kate. Hi, I'm Debbie Bath. Up until yesterday, I was Senior Academic Developer at Swansea University. And this is day 2 of my new job in Alt. Woo-hoo! So I'm now Membership Manager at Alt. So I'm also a part-time PhD student at Lancaster University in Technology Enhanced Learning and e-research. And I'm in year 3 of that. I'm delighted to be here. And we had a fabulous keynote.
Congratulations on the new role. And yes, speaking of a fabulous keynote, hello, Jesse.
I'm Jesse Stommel, and I recognize many of the people here in Virtually Connecting. I should be counting the number of these that I've done, but I've been doing them since the very first ones, and it must be 20. I don't actually know who I am anymore because I gave a keynote, so my brain's a little fuzzy. Actually, I had a really wonderful, marvelous time talking to the group this morning, and I spoke to them about critical pedagogy, civil disobedience, and EdTech. And currently, I am a senior lecturer in digital studies at University of Mary Washington.
Thank you, Jesse. And Teresa and I were chatting while we were setting up, and she managed to listen to the keynote. I only got to the turned in part, but I feel like that's the crescendo, and it gets more interesting from there. So I hope to get to that later. So thank you.
Richard behind the scenes as well.
Oh, Richard, yes.
Off screen, I'm Richard, and I'm sort of here to make sure the tech all works.
Now, don't belittle yourself, Richard. I've been an on-site buddy. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Just to pass back to our virtual folks, if we could just go maybe in order and get you to talk about who you are and where you're from really quickly, and then we can start the conversation. Teresa, I might start with you.
Thanks. Okay, I'll start. The order, hi Deb. The order probably changes depending on people's display, so we might need to name people. But I'm Teresa McKinnon at Warwick Language. Last week I was presenting on critical digital literacies at Eurocall in Belgium, drawing a lot of the work from both Jesse and Slam Teacher, who I'll mention too, yeah, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to connect with you all at Alt and to follow the discussions. We've really pushed them on further today, which is great.
Thanks, Teresa. Kay, are you there?
Hi there. Yeah, my name's Kay Hack. I work for Advance HE. I used to be academic lead for STEM and highly involved in digital pedagogies. My role's a little bit more generic now, but I like to dip into this conference to see what's happening, making sure that what we're doing is still up to date with the wider community. So just think it's fantastic that AltC make so much of their content freely available. And I will say up front, I wish Advance HE were following a little bit more in their footsteps. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Kay. Mags, you're there?
Yeah, okay. Hi. I heard somebody say 3rd year PhD, part-time, SNAP. There we are. Currently wrangling with the ethics, applications, ready to get into fieldwork. Love following ALTC from afar. Love VConnect. Everything is relational, and the more we can connect, the better. So thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mags. And from slightly further afar, Steve, do you want to come in and tell us where you are?
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm from Bangkok. I'm teaching in an international school, and I'm also a part-time MSc student at University of Edinburgh Digital Education course. And I'm here because I'm just interested to see what it's like to take part in something like this.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. And Tony.
Thanks very much. Hi, Kate. Tony here. I'm in the University of Maynooth in Ireland, so a little closer to Kate and Mags geographically than Steve. I work with digital learning with primary student teachers. So again, know very little about ALT, just sort of seen it on the Twitter feeds and stuff. So I'm just here to listen and learn. Thanks for having us aboard.
Great. And thanks everyone just for being involved. And I don't want to take over the conversation. I want to open it to our virtual participants. We're keeping an eye on Twitter, keeping an eye on the chat. Does anyone have a question for anyone about the conference? I know someone did give a keynote a little while ago, if anyone wanted to follow up on that. Or I might actually start with one question. Jesse, did you talk to anyone from Turnitin yet?
He's run away.
No, and I will actually say that I may try, but the interesting thing about Turnitin is usually, I mean, I've been doing so much research and writing publicly about plagiarism detection and Turnitin for 4 to 5 years. And I've had all kinds of other companies talk to me very directly and reach out to me and engage with me on Twitter, for example. And Turnitin has never spoken to me. And so I sort of feel like my name is on a list somewhere. And I'm reconciling with that.
That's interesting. I picture a Polaroid of you by a cash register somewhere telling them not to serve this man or speak to this man. So that's, oh, am I frozen? No.
Yeah, we seem to have frozen.
Oh, you're back. You okay? Yeah, I think we're okay. Hoping everyone has a stable connection. I should be okay here. No, thanks for that, Jesse. And I might just go back to the virtual participants. Does anyone want to jump in that maybe has dealt with some of these issues around ed tech companies or their own thoughts about dealing with ed tech companies? No, everyone's quiet this morning. That's fair enough. Then I'd love to hear maybe a little bit more about the keynote from your perspectives, maybe Deb or John. Anything that...
It was really, really cool, apart from anything else. And he started off by, so funny, started off by sitting on the stage, which I thought was really good. It really had a sort of a lovely atmosphere of having a conversation, and I thought that was a really nice approach. And then it just kind of hit you with all of these really critical things to think about, really, and a lot of them I hadn't thought about. And it was funny because there was a lot of resonance between what you were saying today and what Sue was saying yesterday, and all the kind of terms and conditions and stuff like that. So the two, it was almost as if you planned it.
Yeah,
you did, didn't you?
Well, we sort of did, in the sense that I was able to, I am the kind of person who I prepare my keynotes in advance, but then the actual keynote I give is completely different from what I prepared. Unless I'm the opening keynote and I don't have any time, but even then I usually change it based on whatever I talk to people about at dinner the night before the event. So in some ways, after seeing her keynote, I was able to modify and change mine. And the thing that hers, and I gave her this compliment as well, the thing that hers allowed me to do was sort of narrow in, drill in a way that I wouldn't necessarily feel like I could have done if she hadn't given such a great broad overview.
Yeah.
So I had actually originally planned on having a bit about proctoring software, a bit about plagiarism detection software, a bit about grades, a bit about learning management systems. And instead, what I did is, sure, I mentioned proctoring at one point, and I had a little bit about learning management systems, but I was able to actually just pick one and use it almost as a case study for what I was describing, which I don't know if I would have been able to do without her foundation that she laid.
Oh, that's really good. Good. Yeah, no, I thought they were both great, that Sue's yesterday and Jess today. And I hope that it came across as well as it did in person, sort of virtually as well. And the fact that these things are live streamed and recorded as well is fabulous, I think, to kind of widen the audience. But what did you think, John?
So I thought both keynotes so far have been absolutely amazing, and I really appreciate the work that Jesse and Sean do in critical digital pedagogy. I think one of the challenges that I can keep coming back to is often it's set up as a tension between the student as a participant, as the learner, and the ed tech company as the predator. And I think increasingly as I'm more on the kind of administrative side of it, where does that fit into it? Where is, because I feel that institutions have a legitimate interest in working or trying to work with some of the data that's created in the digital environment by their students as part of the course activity, part of the learning experience. But what does that look like? Because it seems like either you have wonderful free range chaos sometimes, which can be one good thing, or you get into a situation where the only way to do anything is to be sharing with a large company as well.
Yeah.
I mean, how does one navigate that space? I guess that would be my question for the keynote.
Yeah. Well, I think I often talk about myself. So a lot of my work is teaching teachers. So in some ways, a whole lot of my work is about advocating for students and advocating for student agency, because that's what's at the foundation of my pedagogy. However, more of my work is faculty development and teaching teachers. So I actually feel like in some ways, the bulk of my work is about being an advocate for teachers. And essentially, the way I often describe that is that even if I'm in an administrative role, I see myself as kind of standing in the gap between teachers and administration that's putting various different pressures on them. But I think to answer your question, I would also see my role as standing in the gap between teachers and ed tech companies. And so what that standing in the gap means, it doesn't necessarily mean being a buffer. It means being a translator, being someone who can speak to both. And essentially, basically, my hope is always that my voice allows the voices of hundreds of teachers, thousands of teachers, the entire world of teachers, it allows it to sort of echo up to the tech companies. And honestly, the ones that listen are the ones that I want to talk with. And I work in an administrative role also, where I have to work directly with companies. And in some cases, my institution has already adopted them even before I've arrived on the scene. So I have no ability to have decision-making power. And you can't just turn your nose up at them. You actually have to talk to them. And you have to be able to stand in the gap effectively, which means talking to both.
I was recently part of a contract negotiation, and one of the things that I was really pleasantly surprised by was how responsive that particular company was to modifying terms and conditions, and how much they were open to negotiation. And kind of like, okay, yeah, we can do that, or we can't do that.
Yeah.
I think often when you get terms and conditions as part of a contract, you feel like you got to either accept them or reject them.
Yeah.
But, I think sometimes it's hard to realize that you can negotiate.
I think also the conversation. Oh, sorry.
So it was that was one of my questions on Twitter during the keynote was, how as an institution would you react if an individual student said, no, I'm not happy with those terms and conditions? Say for Turnitin, for example, you're running all your assessments through Turnitin, and a student says, no, I'm not happy with those terms and conditions. What do you do as an institution then?
Yeah, and I think that's one of my biggest issues is when students are compelled, when they are made to give data or have their data taken or sign over their data to a particular ed tech company because the institution says they have to in order to graduate, in order to, and the institution in that case has a lot of power. So in some ways, holding the ed tech company responsible, that's just a piece of it. The other piece is also saying, if your institution is making student data a condition for graduation, a condition for completion of a module, completion of a program, completion of a degree, there's something problematic about that. If the student has no way to opt out.
Yeah.
And that goes then beyond the ed tech companies into social media. And we are doing this on Facebook. We are doing this on, and I'm not decrying the use of Facebook, but where that's the only channel that you're giving students for some of the content. And you're forcing students onto an external system, whatever it might be, Turnitin, Facebook, Twitter, any of them.
Yeah, and the thing is that I'm not, I'm not exempt from that. Currently, for the class I'm teaching right now, I'm using, it's an Intro to Digital Studies. And so I tell the students, we are going to have the course happen on the web because it's about the web.
Yeah.
But that means we're using a lot of corporate tools.
Yes.
So we're using Medium and we're using Slack and we'll probably dabble with Twitter. And so how do I make sure that I'm having the conversation with students early enough where they feel like they could opt out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Choice. They feel they've got a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I might even point out, I think, Jesse, was it DPL 2018, you did the one-day track with Chris, the tool, apps and tools, I think, Parade, and we did the celebrity deathmatch of ed tech companies. And I know you both of you at the time, you had made kind of the resource available. I'm sure I have it kicking around somewhere still. So we got to spend a day pitting companies against each other, essentially, maybe 2 LMS companies or something like that. So it was actually really interesting to do that and look at who are the people that run this company, who are the CEOs, what are the terms and conditions. I would encourage you to maybe try it with your own staff, because I come back, the same way. We're working with faculty, we're faculty development, and what can I do to educate them, to educate their students.
Yeah. I guess if there was one thing that I think that would be valuable for us to do, and I think this is getting somewhat back to your question, it's to make sure that when we're talking about adopting an ed tech company or ed tech tool, or when we're talking about how to roll it out, how to implement it, that we're making sure to have pedagogical discussions about that, as opposed to just bureaucratic ones. Because too often the tools are adopted because they make something efficient, but then they have also a huge effect and impact on the pedagogy. And so just making sure that those are both pedagogical and technical and bureaucratic questions.
That's a great point. Just because I know I'm taking 20 minutes of your time here, we have some questions kind of popping up in the chat, and I also am conscious that we haven't heard a lot from our virtual participants. Before I go to the chat, is there anyone else that's joining us online that just maybe wants to know a little bit more about ALT? I suppose even from the context that we have, Jesse is new to that conference, but we have some folks that are used to it. Do you want to ask them anything about just that experience, or?
I'm somebody who works for ALT.
Yes. Does anyone want to chime in before we let these folks go?
Well, I don't want there to be an awkward silence again. I can see Tony saying no. And I'm an experienced ALT member myself, so I kind of, I know this community. I love this community, and often, unfortunately, from afar. But what I will say, coming back to what Jesse was saying just now, is it is so important that pedagogy is part of the discussion. And this has been a battle I've had in the UK in terms of tool choice for language teaching and learning, that actually the institutional preference has gone to the tools we have available rather than the pedagogy. And the pedagogy has not been, or the learning, the environment we want to create has not been sufficiently part of that discussion. And I realize obviously procurement of ed tech tools is usually a small team within your institution, but it needs to be a small team that connects and speaks to the practitioners that actually have to be using these tools or are using these tools. So organizations like ALTC are really helpful because they pull together people from all different aspects of you know, whether it's procurement, people working in academic technology, whether it's practitioners, people in different sectors. It's so important that we have these dialogues, and sometimes they're difficult conversations to have. But if we fight shy of them, it's actually our learners that lose out. And you know, I think we have to take on this this message of critical pedagogy, critical digital literacies. I haven't seen critical digital literacies included in any digital framework. I've looked at many of them. Well-being. Yeah, we've started to, you know, we've started to acknowledge that actually sitting in front of screens isn't great for people 24 hours a day. But we need to think about, you know, are we including people in understanding open licenses, open practice? If we're preparing people for the real world, we need to scaffold that as practitioners. So it's great to see that conversation being opened up at ALTC, and I'm sure we'll be able to push things forward, thanks to Jessie and others actually doing the work.
Yeah, thanks for that, Teresa. And it does actually play into just some of the kind of the points that are being made in the chat, just to kind of wrap up on a few points that Steve was asking, you know, how do you explain the problem of something like Turnitin to students and even their parents so that they understand? That Mags was talking about, how do we translate, you know, EdTech jargon, which is a very similar point, is that how do we explain this to the people that are actually using those technologies? And I think I've never been to the ALT conference, but I'm a long-time member. I'd like to get to attend one of these days, but I attend virtually like you folks are. And I think that's one of the nice things about that community, is just that it's an EdTech conference, yet these critical conversations are emerging. So I would encourage, I think, anyone on the chat to maybe get onto Twitter or follow up on these questions with these folks. But I am conscious, does anyone want to come in? Anyone else? Don't be shy.
Could I encourage Steve to perhaps voice what he's put in the chat? Because it's a really interesting point, especially with young learners.
Yeah, so I'm a student at University of Edinburgh on the digital education course, so I don't have to use Turnitin, thankfully, but I do use it with my students because I have to use it with my students, and my students are between around 16, 17 years old. Trying to explain why Turnitin is bad to other teachers around me who have very little to do with anything in education apart from Google Docs seems to be a real challenge, and I just wonder how you could go about tackling that.
It's a great question, and I come from a background in secondary teaching, and you know, there is no choice. Essentially, as you're saying, if you're under 16, this is what you're told, or under 18, this is what you're told you use, and you use it. But what I would question as a practitioner, as a teacher, is: are we getting the assessment tasks right? Are we, if we're so concerned about plagiarism, are we asking people to do the right stuff in order to evaluate and assess their learning? That's where
that comes right the way back to assessment design, doesn't it?
It does, and unfortunately, you know, over recent years, having been on that journey myself, I've realised how little teachers understand about assessment. Yeah. Because they're encouraged just to do it without really understanding the philosophies behind it and the processes behind it. It hasn't been deconstructed sufficiently.
Yeah, I'd say that teachers...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd say that teachers in the UK don't get to decide the assessment because that's decided by the exam board like Pearson, that's defined by the QCA. So the assessments I'm talking about are kind of exam board defined assessments. So it's only for kind of external examination, not anything in.
Yeah, one of the things that, and actually I didn't talk about it in the keynote, but it is in the slides. There's about 10 slides that I skipped over where I made the connection between the critical approach to ed tech and also then argue that grades are also a technology and a relatively recent invention. And I think that there's a direct connection between some of my critique of certain ed tech tools and my critique of grades and grading. because in a lot of cases, and it's the argument that I make that that our ed tech companies are too often designed to meet the bureaucratic needs of our institutions as opposed to the pedagogical ones. And one of the most foundational bureaucratic needs is granting credit, granting degrees, assessing students, grading. And so a learning management system or a VLE, for example, is constructed so that all roads lead back to the gradebook, which means that the gradebook is the founding principle of the design of the tool. And so I don't necessarily think that we can push on the pedagogical approaches of some of these ed tech tools without dealing with the elephant in the room, which is how we assess students and whether or not we're including them, the students, in the assessment conversation is one of the huge things that's broken inside of tools like the LMS or the VLE. I have my student assessment is completely driven by the students, and the tool is not set up. The tool is set up so that I'm the masters of the key, of the sort of key to the kingdom. Whereas in my pedagogy, the students is the master of the key of the kingdom of assessment. And so the tool is sort of broken at its core when I approach it.
It's an excellent point. As someone that's kind of in that space of running workshops and training and staff development and all that stuff that comes at the beginning of the year, that constant conversation is coming up that just please stop trying to fit a square peg in a round hole and use a tool that, you know, is not applicable to what you're actually trying to do or what you really value or are trying to achieve. Folks, I'm just conscious of keeping you a little bit too long, that maybe to kind of finish off on the alt experience for those of us that aren't there. And it looks amazing that, you know, I know Igoe is a beautiful campus, and I've been to Mary Washington and I'm awed by the Convergence Center. You know, we go to different campuses, but it looks pretty stunning and pretty lively. Are there any kind of final comments that you would make about the experience as a whole?
Just to agree, I mean, Edinburgh is a beautiful city anyway. There's some beautiful buildings around here, some of them fairly old and as was commented on in the introduction this morning, Hogwarts style, and some of them very new and very modern and very well equipped. That's the sort of physical environment, but alt isn't so much about that. It's about the people in the community, and whether it's meeting up with people before the sort of welcome and the keynote, or in the sort of networking breaks in the middle, or in the pub last night and over food and a couple of gins. Or...
You didn't invite me to the pub.
Everybody was invited to the pub. It was on the social instructions. A couple of just skipped the walk so we could get to the pub earlier.
You missed the memo.
But yeah, it's the community, it's the networking, it's the people. Yes, the surroundings are fantastic, but it's the people that you meet in the community, whether it's all year on the forums and mailing lists, or at CURE or the Alt OER conference or any of the others that get run. That, for me, is the important bit of the experience.
And I was just going to add as well, I'm not sure if any of you guys aren't members of Alt, but if anybody does have any questions, just getting my membership manager role bit in. But, you know, you can find me, I'm on Twitter and I'm on the Alt webpage. If you've got any questions at all, come and get in touch. And I'm also going to be looking after the CMALT professional accreditation as well, which makes it sound like I really know what I'm doing, but I've got to do it myself as well. Yeah, if you've got any questions, please come and tell me. And also, if you've got any comments about how your experience has been virtually of Alt, I'd be interested to hear that as well. So let me know. Obviously, Teresa and I know each other well because we work together on the OESIG as well. But yeah, please get in touch. So, it's been great.
Thank
And
you.
I think if I was going to add something to that, I would say I think that the virtual participation that Alt offers is fantastic. I'm still waiting to see what their plans are for the Killy tonight.
Did you not get the memo for that? We're expecting.
Let's get our priorities right.
Yeah, why didn't we do virtual connecting dance?
Yeah.
Edition?
Do we have the technology?
sweet.
It's okay. We can look into it. Mags, do you want to jump in for a second?
Yeah, I want someone to give a big shout out to the sort of the whoever's doing the Twitter feed and the virtual connecting, the on air stuff. It's really, really lovely just to follow it as the couple of days went through. And a super shout out from my country persons, Louise Drum, for bringing theatre into her presentation. And I hope some of you were at the GASTA presentation. My friend Tom Farley has put a whole new language and a whole new conference, unconference into the conference. So it's been fantastic to watch that from afar. Thank you.
The GASTA sessions, I missed them this year, but I took part in Tom's GASTA session last year, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. Really, really good.
So now you can speak Irish? You can count to 5 in Irish?
I could remember, yeah. But it was fabulous. It had such an energy in the room, and Tom's just fabulous, isn't he?
Yeah.
And yes, I went to one of the sessions that had the acting, the Forum Theatre. I only managed to get there for about 10 minutes, but it was really good. And they had kind of people improvising about a student scenario. And there was some great acting skills going on in there. So
yeah, and I think Louise, in her blog post about it, she made a really good point about it was just a physical thing. She needed an open, flexible space. But I was struck by the fact that she also, and she had in her attendance, an open, flexible set of participants. You can tell this is the world I'm coming from. I'm studying Teachmeet and the whole sort of democratic, what Liz Bennett calls guerrilla professional development. But thank you all for this feeling of inclusion from afar. It's really important.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah. Is there an LTHE chat tonight at Alt? I've got a feeling I saw something that there's going to be an LTHE chat.
Well, we had the pre-one last week, didn't we? I'm not sure. I will check, and if there is, I'll tweet out. But I'm not sure. I probably should know.
There's too much to know.
At night, half the participants at least are here, so I'd be surprised if something wasn't going on.
Absolutely.
It's
been a really useful
gala dinner by then. So.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. It's been a really good network to have those Twitter conversations and connect educators.
That could be interesting.
Folks, I think we're ending this conversation on a high, considering some joyful, open and different sessions and different kinds of professional development. And as Mags has said, and Mags has joined in Virtually Connecting for me in the past, it's great to connect like this. You know, it's great to connect with Jessie in Edinburgh when I saw you a few weeks ago in Virginia. It's great to meet new people. And I wanted to point out one thing on the chat just to end that conversation, because I know she has her mic muted. Kay was saying she did some outreach work with 15 to 17-year-olds. Youth turned in to collect their submissions for a competition, purely from a logistics point of view. No plagiarism and 300 plus submissions. So is there a message that we should maybe trust our students and try to remember that at the core, or what are we teaching them in higher ed as a whole? So that's a very positive point I wanted to point out, because sometimes actually the chat has descended into talk of the pub. So
quite right too.
I don't know, we should go to the pub right now.
It would be socially acceptable in that case, Jessie. Anyone else want to add anything before we let these poor folks that are working very hard, and I know it's a very busy conference in general, go? Anything else? Okay. Thank you, every one of you. Thank you, Richard, even though I can't see you, for your hard work and trying to find a very quiet spot and trying to facilitate a conversation like this. And Jessie, thank you for agreeing to do it, obviously after giving a keynote and after traveling. And Deb, we will put people in touch. And John, it was very nice to meet you. Folks, thanks a million. I'm going to stop recording now, but if anyone wants to hang on and have a conversation for a few minutes, we can do that. So I'm just going to press stop now.